Hi, I'm Gareth Green and welcome to the third in our series of cool extended chord progressions. And in this series, I'm just giving you a relatively small number of chords to kind of have a think about and to have a play around with as a practical musician. So many people telling me, I just need to be able to do something more interesting with my harmony. Just kind of stuck in the same old rut. I go around the same old things every time I improvise or I compose. How do I break out of that? And what are the possibilities when I get into these extended chords? Okay, well, in the last one in this series, we were talking about extending chords to the seventh. And here's another one where we're basically thinking about extending chords to the seventh, but I've just thrown in a 13th before the end. One thing that you can do when you're trying to kind of make life a bit interesting is to follow this kind of circle of fifths pattern. Now, what do I mean by that? After the first chord, you might notice the bass is going E down to A, that's down a fifth, up a fourth to D, down a fifth to G. It could go up a fourth to C. In fact, I've just taken it down to the bottom C. It doesn't matter. But this idea of alternating fourths and fifths, going down one and up the other in the bass, kind of throwing up the chords that come from there. It's a very good thing to do. And it's been in action since Baroque days. So back in the 1600s, people were doing this stuff. But it still works in lots of different musical styles now. So it's something else just think about. You know, just go down a fifth, up a fourth, down a fifth, up a fourth, and just keep going as long as you want to. And then just stick chords on top of it. Particularly if you want to stick seventh chords on top of it, works quite well. Then you can decide, well, what kind of seventh chord? So am I going to have an E minor 7 that I've got here? But it could be an E major 7 if you want to do that, you know, so there are different possibilities. I've got an A7, but you could decide to have an A minor 7. So you can kind of mess about with accidentals and see where that kind of takes you. Okay, well, you can see what I'm doing here anyway. The first chord is an F major 7, so that's F, A, C. Put a major 7th on the top of it. I've got that E there, haven't I? E minor 7, so E minor is E, G, B, and here's the minor 7th on the top of it, E minor 7. A7 is A, C sharp, E, and then G. D minor 7, D, F, A, C, and then G13, of course, is G, B, D, and then F, A, C, E. And if you want to thin out that chord, it's perfectly reasonable to miss out the fifth. You can kick out the ninth and the 11th as well if you want to, but it's entirely up to you. Okay, what does this sound like? Well, here's just one positioning of it. You could organize these chords in a very different way above the bass if you want to, but for argument's sake, this is how I've done it. F7, E minor 7, A7, D minor 7, G13, C major 7. So it's quite a kind of sort of cool progression of chords, isn't it? You can distribute these notes above the bass in any way you want to. One of the things that I'm doing here is some of the time at least using common notes. In other words, I'm saying this E in the F major 7 is also present in the E minor 7. So actually using that as a repeated note, it kind of smooths out the progression a little bit. I'm not using that particularly on the next chords, though I could have done because there are notes in common between E minor 7 and A7. But when I go from A7 to D minor 7, I'm using that A as a common note. So sometimes it just threads things together. If all the chords are just leaping all over the landscape, then it can feel a bit disjointed. So you don't have to be kind of religious about using common notes, but sometimes it's quite a useful thing to do at least some of the time. So those are the chords. And you could just play them as block chords like that, although it's not terribly interesting if you do that, is it? So you might just think, can I write a melody over the top? So do you see, just by doodling around a little melody at the top, you can turn those chords into something that actually sounds like a piece of music. What am I doing? Well, I'm just using auxiliary notes or neighbour tones. Like in the first one, I gave you an F7, I went up a note and came back again. And in fact, when I go from E to F, F belongs to the chord anyway, doesn't it? And then E minor 7, you could use this falling fifth in the melody to come down the scale and do that if you wanted to do that. Anyway, it's up to you. Filling in the notes, in other words, and doing something with that. Or you could decide, well, I don't really want to do that at the top. I want to have some movement in the bass. You could do that, you know. In fact, I've just spotted this rather blatant octaves there. Well, that's probably not such a great idea, but you could reorganize that chord in such a way that you didn't have the octaves. So the top part could maybe have a C sharp at the top there, and then maybe it would go on to D. I mean, there are things you can do about that. Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, that was a deliberate mistake to see if you noticed. But there we have it. Just the idea that you could do this thing about falling a fifth, rising a fourth, or the other way around, and that you could hook into that from something like a neighbouring chord. So because that F is next door to the E, moving from the F to the E and then getting into this kind of fifths and fourths thing is one way of putting a progression together. And then all you've got to do is extend the chord and then think, well, am I happy to extend to sevenths? What happens if I extend to ninths or 11ths or 13ths? What happens if I mix and match that a little bit? Well, the sky's the limit. And you could turn this into a piece in lots of different kinds of styles. And of course, whether you play it loudly at an upbeat tempo, or whether you play it quietly with kind of fairly relaxed pulse, is going to give you an entirely different kind of mood. So one interesting thing to do is to think of how many different styles, different kind of moods you could create out of the same chord progression, and what you do to decorate that chord progression in order to turn that into some kind of piece of music. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me point you to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots of courses on there, but you might be interested in clicking on the button that says Maestros, because what is Maestros? Maestros is a very special thing that we offer, and it comes at 3 levels. They're not ability levels, they're merely engagement levels. So you can sign up to level 1 and you get all sorts of perks, you know, emojis, advanced access to videos, you know, all sorts of things. Definitely worth doing that. And it's a level that just helps us to keep things moving on the channel. If you want to go a bit further, you could become a level 2 member. You get all the level 1 perks plus all the level 2 perks. How about that? It's absolutely amazing. In particular, you have access to a monthly live stream in which I try to teach for an hour a month on topics that members of the group have requested. So we may look at the music of a particular composer, we may analyze a piece of music, we may do a bit of composition work or a bit of oral work or something, whatever it is that our members want to do. And we have a live chat running so people can comment, ask questions, and we kind of get to know each other, and you make musical friends from all over the world. Fantastic group of people. If you want to go up to level 3, well, that gives you additional benefits, and it even gives you reductions on the price of buying one of our courses. But it also gives you access to a second live stream every month, which is really a members workshop. So if you're a composer and you want to submit your own compositions, you can do that. If you're a performer and you want to submit a recording of your performance of something, you can do that. We look at scores, we listen to music, the live chat runs, people make their comments, always very supportive. And then at the end of the live stream, you get some written feedback from me, which people say has been helpful in their own musical journey. So it's a great way of kind of sharing with other people who are on a similar journey. Being a musician is obviously often a rather isolated task, but great to share with other people. Obviously, if you're a level 3 member, you get all the level 2 and the level 1 benefits as well. If you're a level 2 member, you also get all the level 1 benefits. Anyway, click on that Maestros button, have a look and see what it's all about, because I think it may well be for you.